By myself today, so let's hope everything can be seen. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to put the link to the website where I found the fabric basket tutorial and directions. I'm making a large basket, which took about a yard of fabric or a half a yard of two different fabrics. I'm kind of limited on my wovens because I've been using a lot for masks. So I'm going to use the same fabric that I used for aprons. So basically there is a size chart depending on what size basket you want to make. I cut this 17 by 17, which means I think the finished measurements will be, I have to look on the chart, 8 by 8 or something like that. So you have to cut them out, and then on two of the pieces, whatever your outside fabric is going to be, you do need interfacing. Now, there are different types of interfacing. The one that I put on here to make it a little cushioned, and when you make the large and extra large sizes, it did say that you need something a little more stable so it stands straight up. If you have a flimsy fabric, it won't stay like a box. So this is a fusible fleece, or batting. So if you've done quilts or anything like that, this is usually what's inside of it. And on this side there's glue, so it's bumpy, and you iron that on and it will stick. So that's what I used, and I'm only using it on one layer of the fabric, so it'll basically stand up pretty tall. So it shouldn't be too flimsy when this is done. There are a couple other kinds. This is a very lightweight interfacing. Again, it's fusible, which means there's glue and you iron it on, but this is not going to add much weight to your fabric. And then I had found this one. This feels like more like a paper. And so this is more of like what's it called? A stabilizer for embroidering, but you could by all means use this for interfacing as well. This is not fusible, which means you'd have to sew it. And then the last one, this is very stable, so you can see it's very structured. This is also fusible. There's glue on it, so you could glue that. So if you wanted something super structured, you would use that. This particular one said a medium weight, so that's why I'm using the fleece. And I was trying not to have to go out and buy anything special because it is hard. You can only do curbside pickup at Joann's. So once you get your pieces cut out, so I cut 4 pieces, 17 by 17, and then for this size basket, you want to cut 4 inches out at each corner. Okay, so I have 2 pieces with the interfacing, 2 pieces without it, and they look the same. So what we're going to do is sew down the sides and the bottom, not sewing the corners. Then we'll sew the corners. We'll put the bag or the basket together. So it's sort of like a pillow, flip it, press it, and then it's basically done. So it's not super hard. I did see another really cute type of basket that I thought would be good for a demo as well, but I did not have the interfacing that I called for because it was supposed to be pretty stiff. So I'm going to see about getting that and do a tutorial on it. It's a folding basket. So basically you make it with some pockets and it's pretty stiff, and then you basically fold it and it stays that way. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to sew all of this at a 1/2 inch. So it's basically like you're doing 2 different things. And again, I apologize, I'm by myself. So I'm just going to do the best I can to make sure that you can see everything. All this stitching at the beginning, you are not going to see it all. You're not going to see stitching until you do top stitching at the very end. So don't worry about color thread because you won't see it. So I'm going to make sure my 2 pieces with my interfacing are matched up with each other. My interfacing is a little short, but that is actually okay. I want to make sure that I'm sewing lined up. So you want to make sure you back stitch at the beginning. And this is going to be a little bit thicker because it has that fusible batting on it. So you just have to take your time. And as long as the batting is in more than 4/8 smaller than your fabric, you should be fine. The other thing is sometimes after you fuse the interfacing on it or batting, sometimes it does come up a little bit. I'm not worried about that either. I just need to stick on most of the way so that I can sew it and it'll be in place. So I'm gonna take that out. I'm going to make sure, so you can see there, I sewed that. So my fabrics lined up with each other, so I'm not super worried that that fleece is a little bit shorter. Then I'm going to line up the bottom of my basket. When you sew this, you want to make sure that you're sewing the outside of the bag or basket and the inside of the basket at the same seam allowance, so they'll end up being the same size. So I'm doing this at 4/8. When I get to the end of the bottom piece, I want to make sure I back stitch again. So you can see there, I back stitched, and now I'm going to do this side. So again, before I sew something, I always just try and make sure that my fabric is matched up. If you feel like you need to pin it, by all means go ahead and do that. When I'm sewing stable stuff like this, I usually do not pin it because it really doesn't move very much. And it's going to feel kind of cushiony because of the batting that's on here. So I'm taking my time on this one. I'll be able to go a little faster on the one that doesn't have any batting. So I'm just adjusting a little bit. And when you go to put the inside and the outside together, it's going to be super important that at this spot at the ends was exactly 4/8, or when you go to put the inside and outside together, it does not, it won't line up with each other. Okay, so I've sewed those 3 things. These are my corners. I'm going to leave that put just for a second. And now I'm going to do the same thing on my 2 pieces that don't have the interfacing. So again, I'm matching everything up, making sure I back stitch at the beginning and the end of each side. When you attach fusible interfacing, it's a good idea. You need heat, steam, and pressure for it to work. So you definitely need steam in your iron. If you have a pressing cloth, you can basically wet that to make it moist and put that down on top, and that will help as well. If you don't have a pressing cloth or don't know what that is, it's a piece of fabric, or you can buy a pressing cloth, and what it does is it protects your iron from fabric being melted onto it, and also protects your fabric from being melted or burned. And so if you don't have a pressing cloth, you can actually make one. You just need it to be out of a fabric that can withstand very high temperatures. So something like linen and cotton can withstand those high temperatures. So you just need to make sure it's one of those types of fabric. They have, I believe, silk ones, and I could do a whole lesson on pressing cloths, but really it's to protect your iron and your fabric. Sometimes when you iron fabrics and you melt them a little bit, any of your manufactured or man-made fabrics, you end up getting shininess to it, and that's because what you're basically doing, polyester, nylon, acrylic, those all start as these little plastic-like beads that they melt and usually dye, and then they turn them into yarns. And so when they get super hot, you're reheating it back into that liquid form, and then it hardens again. Okay, so I have this done. So now I need to sew my corners. So what I'm going to do is open up my basket. You could press this if you want. I'm not going to take the time to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my side seam and my bottom seam, and I'm going to open them up. That way it'll sit a little bit flatter, and then I'll open them up at the top as well. So if you want to press this, you can. I'm not going to do that. And then we're going to sew across the corner again at 4/8. So when I was cutting the corner, I was using my rotary cutter, and I cut a little bit too far, but it's not bigger than 4/8. If you do cut too far and it's bigger than what you're sewing at, you will have a hole. So I just made a clip that was a little bit too big. So I just went over the center seam. So now I just want to make sure everything on this side's matched up. Sew to the end. And back stitch. Okay, so I've sewed across the corner and my seam is matched up there, which is what I want. So I'm going to come over here to the other corner. I'm going to match up my seams again. And again, if you want to press this, you can, but these are pretty stable. And then I'm going to open my seam allowance and make sure when I opened, they are still matched up with each other. If you don't cut your corner exactly the size, so this was 4x4, so let's say you cut it a little bit uneven, it's not going to be matched up exactly when you do this. And whatever amount that you're cutting out of the corner, so if I cut a 4-inch square, it's going to be 8 inches across. And that's going to give you the one dimension of the basket. Now, when I looked at the directions, it actually told me to leave my opening on one side of the lining, which would be here, but I'm actually going to leave it on the top because I think that's easier. Okay, so I did that. And I'm going to leave this inside out because when I put these two together, I do need the right sides touching. So now I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to go inside. I'm going to open up my corner, match up my seam allowances, and this part's going to be really important that you open them up because there's a lot of thickness here. You have about 4 layers of the fleece, so you want to make sure that it's not too thick for your machine. I'm going to back stitch. And I'm pushing down where the seam is again just to make sure that it stays like that until I'm done. I'm actually making this basket. It might end up being a little bit too big, but Milo has a bunch of new toys for a new puppy. And so I thought I could make a basket to stick his toys in. This may be a little bit too tall. I wanted to make one where we could put the toys in it and then he could go grab them out. So again, this might be a little bit too tall. I might have to make a smaller one. And I may get some little doggy fabric to do that. But that was the whole reason why I was choosing to make this. And depending on how much your yard of fabric costs and the cost of your interfacing, these can definitely be less expensive than those fabric bins that you buy for the cube organizers. Sometimes those are pretty expensive. So it just depends on how much, do you think it's worth it to make them yourself or spend money buying them. Okay, so I've sewed across there. So now what I'm going to do is turn the one with the interfacing right side out, and when I do this, I want to make sure that I push my corners out. Good. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. Okay, so there's the bottom of our basket. It's pretty square. Okay, and undo it all the way like that. If you ever buy fat quarter bundles, that could work for this. You would just need 4 fat quarters. You'd need to make sure, I guess you could do 4 different ones. But I would probably, if I was doing this, I would probably use a 1/2 yard of one fabric, 1/2 yard for the other, because you'll see how we can turn down the top, and then you can see that accent piece. Like I said, I'm pretty short on my woven fabrics at this point, so I just have to use what I can get. So once you have them matched up, you're going to match up the side seams, and again, we're going to open it up. I'm going to leave an opening in the center of one of the two sides. So for this particular part, I am going to pin it because I do want to make sure as I'm going around in a circle that I don't move my side seams. If it was flat, it would be something different. So I have those matched up. I do want to make sure that both seams are open. And I'm going to put a pin in there again just to hold it. And then I'm going to come around here to the other side and do the same thing. So again, if you sewed something incorrectly, let's say you sewed one a little bigger than the other, and these two pieces are not going to match up. If one piece is bigger than the other, you're going to get a little pleat or pucker in the bigger one to make it fit. Okay, and then I'm going to put a couple more pins again because I am going to be going around in a circle. So I don't want this to end up not being lined up. So my fleece is separating a little bit there, and that's fine. And I'm going to come over here on this side and do the same thing. You only need a couple pins. The other thing is, depending on what direction you cut the fabric, one direction is a little stretchy, even if it's not stretchy fabric. So if you cut it in a particular direction, you can get a little bit of stretch here just in case you didn't match it up. So what I'm going to do now is sew around this circle, leaving an opening so that I can pull the bag through. So because this is a little bit on the thick side, I'm probably going to do, I don't know, 5 inches or so. When you're sewing a circle, you can take this extension table off of your machine, and that makes it easy to go around this circle. We do need to make sure we backstitch at the beginning and end when we do this part because, again, you're going to be pulling the fabric through, so there is a good chance that you can end up ruining or ripping your fabric or having the stitches come out. Okay, so I'm going to sew this part at 4/8 again. Backstitch at the beginning. When I get close to the seam, again, I just want to make sure that it is actually open. Again, you're going to have a lot of bulk there because you have the 2 layers of fleece and 2 layers of fabric on each side. And then every time I sew some, I'm just making sure that it's staying lined up and guiding it through the machine. Again, I don't really want to sew over my pins if I can avoid it. Again, when you get close to the seam, just make sure it's matched up. Then take the pin out, and hopefully it stays lined up. Sometimes when a seam is really thick too, if you pinch it or hammer it down, that will help as well. So I'm almost back at my beginning or on my end. Oops. Okay, and then I'm going to back stitch. So I've sewed the whole way around this upper circle except this spot here. So now what I'm going to do is go inside and I'm going to start to pull it through. Again, just be careful when you do this. You really don't want to tear your fabric by trying to pull too much at one time. And it is pretty thick. Sometimes too you can stretch your fabric out right where that beginning and end of the opening is. So when you turn it, you're going to have your bag and your lining. Okay, you can double check and make sure your seams match up, which they did. And I am going to press this next part so that I can make sure everything sits flat. So let's go over here to the ironing board. So when I iron this first, I want to keep it the way it is right now. So I don't want to put my lining in yet. So I want to just make sure everything sits flat and my opening is right there. So I'm trying to get a good press so that when I go to put the lining inside the bag, it stays good. And then you just want to go around the circle. So just pull this so what you're trying to iron sits flat, so make sure it's open. And then as long as you're not where the opening is, you can wiggle the seam allowance. Okay, make sure it's pulled open or you're not going to have a nice top edge. Okay, and then back at the beginning, my iron wasn't super hot because it's been sitting here and automatically turned off. So I'm just going to redo my beginning real quick. My opening is right here. Okay, so once I get that good, then I'm going to put my lining inside of the outside of the bag. And I want my seam on the top edge. And I have my opening here, but when we top stitch that, I'll close the opening. So that's actually why I left the opening on the top edge and not the side of the lining. So now I'm going to press it again. So I'm going to make sure that my seam is on the end. And then when I press it, that'll give me a nice crisp edge. So I'm going to end with where my opening is. So press it. And then rotate it, and then I finger press it again just to make sure I give it a good little press, and it'll stay a little bit better. Make sure it's good. Okay, and now I'm back where the opening is. So now when I do this part, I just want to be extra careful to make sure that I'm pressing it in the correct spot. So I'm making sure my edges are matched up. And then I'm going to give that part one more press and just hold it a second just to make sure that it is good. Okay, and now I'm going to top stitch around here just to close the opening and hold the inside to the inside and the outside to the outside. And if I had two different fabrics, it would be a lot more obvious if you don't have them matched up very good at the edge. So again, I left my extension table off because I have to go around in a circle again. When you top stitch, and because we're closing an opening, you want your needle as far to the right as you can get it. That way you're pretty close to the edge. And then we're going to top stitch. And this is the only stitching that you're going to see on the basket. So you just want to make sure that your thread color is pretty close to your fabric color if your fabric is one color, because if you sew crooked at all and your thread is is a much different color and very noticeable, you're going to be able to tell a lot if you didn't sew straight. So because my fabric is multicolored, I'm just using the black that's in there, because no color would match exactly, because there's all sorts of different colors in here. But I also have to know that people are going to see if I sewed crooked, because thread's going to show up. Sometimes too you can find rainbow thread. I think it's called variegated. And so on something like this I could do that where it goes red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And then once I get back to my beginning, I'm going to I don't have to do back stitching, I'm going to overlap. So I'm going to go past my beginning about a ½ inch. So it's important when you get back to your beginning to go a little bit slow and then sew over the beginning about a ½ inch. Cut your threads. So I've sewn all the way around there. I'm going to trim my threads, and then there's one more thing you can do if you choose to. So you could, the basket is sewn at this point, so you could, if you wanted a little bit taller, let's say you were making a basket for pillows or blankets or something, you could leave it tall like that. But you can also fold down the top of the basket, and that's why I was saying if you had two fabrics that coordinated with each other, that would give it a nice look. So you would have your outside fabric, and then you can see on the inside. So that is our fabric basket. So I'm not sure what I'm going to put in here because I think it might be a little bit too big for Milo to get in there because he's kind of small. So that is my fabric basket tutorial. So I will put the link that gives you all the directions. And again, this is the large size so that you have an idea. And she does say, depending on how much you fold down the top, the size will be a little bit different. So I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I will see you later. Have a good night.